Hey, what's going on, good people? It's Gardner Douglas, your Oyster Ninja. Um, Here with Mr. Chris Catucci. That's Mr. Shuckologist on the gram. What's going on, Chris? How you feel?
I'm feeling good, Gardner. Thanks for having me. Just typical shucker, trying to let my hands heal on my day off.
Okay. Well, I appreciate you for coming on the show and introducing people into your circle, into your life. And let's start from there. I know you're up in Rhode Island. Just tell me a little bit about yourself and how you got into this seafood industry.
Yeah, so I grew up in Rhode Island. Growing up, I always kind of enjoyed being on the water or near the water. So that led to me attending the University of Rhode Island, where I studied aquaculture and fisheries. I graduated in 2017. And since then I've worked at four different oyster farms as well as four different restaurants, shucking oysters. So kind of just started in college, took a tour of a few oyster farms. And honestly, that might have been the first time I had an oyster. Going on the farm tour, kind of checking things out, seeing how the guys do it around here. And yeah, that's kind of what planted the seed that led to this point.
So nice. Before we started, you said you actually won the junior fishing champion. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, I won the junior bass fishing world championship when I was in high school. It kind of came timely. I used to play baseball a lot, and I had a pretty serious injury to my rotator cuff in my shoulder. So that kind of prevented me from playing baseball, but I was able to fish. And I was kind of able to, use that energy I had from, not being able to do something I love to transfer it to something else. And somehow I ended up with a brand new bass boat before I had my driver's license, which is a little dangerous at that age, but was able to spend a lot of time on the water in that boat and learn a lot, meet a bunch of good people. So it was overall the whole fishing thing was awesome for me growing up. But now I gotta, I can't really make money fishing. I can make money shucking though.
So just far as like the fishing competitions, was that just you like one day, you know what, I'm gonna enter this fishing competition? Like, did you have any background like knowledge about it, or like how'd you get into that?
Yeah, I mean, one of my friends in high school, he kind of introduced me to this junior bass fishing program that they ran. And then that led to me being like, all right, this is something I had already liked fishing. I didn't even know there was tournaments for like, younger children to be able to do where a guy would volunteer their boat. You could use their boat, fish a whole day. Um, and then honestly, the first year doing tournaments is when it all happened. I ended up winning it all that year. So I was able to win the best in Rhode Island. And then I was able to beat everyone from the Northeast, like all New England, including Canada. And then I went down to Shreveport, Louisiana, where I fished the Red River, a lake off the Red River, Cross Lake, and I actually beat this young fellow from West Virginia by 1 ounce. I had 5 pounds 12 ounces. He had 5 pounds 11 ounces, and that was the difference between first and second. Um, so yeah,
Wow,
that's
that's
that's kind
crazy.
of how it all started, And since then, I sold the boat. I'm more into the kayak fishing now. I still do, some local kayak tournaments, but a few years ago, I did travel the whole country doing the fishing tournaments, which was super fun.
Now, what's the secret behind fishing or bass fishing? Like, is there what's the difference between bass fishing and any other fishing?
Yeah, I mean, it's more like kind of casting accuracy and putting together like a pattern in terms of like how you're going to catch fish that day. Um, but I will say, like, just time on the water kind of dictates your level of knowledge and, understanding what to do in certain situations, based on the weather, what's the best, lure for me to throw where I'm going to be at a high efficiency, and it's kind of what the fish are looking for at that moment. So fishing's a lot of kind of mental slash like physical kind of movements in order to, put together a good limit of fish that day.
Now, I know this isn't sponsored, but do you have a favorite lure or anything like that?
Um, no, I mean, I'm like a jig fisherman, frog fisherman. That's probably like my two strengths. Um, so I was on the Hobie fishing team. Now I just don't really have time to do the whole social media, promotion aspects for the kayaks. But I did, I was part of their team for the past 3 years and, helped introduce a lot of new people to the sport, as well as kind of incite them as to which kayak to purchase based on their needs slash body type. Um, but it's grown a ton since COVID. I mean, fishing was like everyone wanted to go out and be on the water when COVID hit because there was nothing else to do.
So let's switch a little bit. So what made you want to study aquaculture in school?
I think it was just like that infatuation with like, how the ecosystems work underwater, whether that be in fresh or salt water. Just kind of something that always interests me. And I felt like if I'm going to go to college and study something, I'd rather do something that I actually like enjoy as opposed to forcing myself. Um, so that's kind of where it started. Now, obviously, aquaculture isn't just oyster farming. You got fish farming. There's a lot of different sectors of that, shrimp farming. But locally around here, the aquaculture industry is dominated by oysters. There is a little bit of scallops that are grown as well as some sugar kelp and mussels. But for the most part, it's oyster driven aquaculture industry in this state. And I mean, over the past 20 years, there's been a crazy increase in the amount of oyster farms.
Do you think that you would ever get in that farming lane?
Possibly. I mean, I've worked at, 4 different farms and, the 3 different styles of growing them, really 4. Couple different types of surface cultures. I worked for West Passage Oyster Company as well as Aquidneck Island Oyster Company. Aquidneck uses those flip farm bags. I think that's the Australian style. And West Passage uses the oyster grows, your typical floating gear that a lot of the farms are using. And I also worked for Fox Island, which is located in Narragansett Bay. It's a bottom culture farm in about 20 to 25 feet of water. He's an ex-lobsterman, so he kind of almost his gear is designed very similar to what a lobster string would be, but instead it's oyster gear on those strings. And then I also worked for American Mussel Harvesters, which is considered the most commercial of the farms I've worked at. They had like 50 acres and it was all suspended line culture, which is definitely requires a lot of equipment on the boat, cranes in order to lift the gear out of the water. But the suspended line culture, you needed a massive bow as well as like $100,000 crane to maintain those type of leases. But working on those 4 farms, I kind of feel like I've learned everything I need to learn in terms of working there and understanding like, okay, well, if I did it myself, this is how I did it because I seen these people do this wrong. This guy did it the right way. There's a lot of nuances to oyster farming. I think that people kind of don't understand, especially from the outside looking in.
What do you think is a common misconception from the consumer about oyster farms?
There's certain farms that buy the seed very, very small and grow that seed, from that very, very small size all the way to like a market sized oyster. And then there's other farms that it seems like they buy the seed larger from other farms that maybe they have extra seed they can't handle, so they're trying to get rid of it. And those farms, you're getting seed from various sources, and a lot of the times when you're buying seed from other farmers that have extra seed, you're not going to be getting the best product because they're going to take the cream of the crop for themselves and sell the stuff that, all right, this is like the slower growing stuff that, had to stay in the upwell an extra couple months. So I think that like the hardest part of oyster farming is growing those baby oysters. It's the most maintenance. You could easily screw things up, but you could also not easily, but you could also do really well if you get a batch of seed very cheap when it's small and are able to grow it to the size of a quarter and send it out on your farm. Like you're going to save money doing that. So I think like just there's people don't kind of get like every farm operates a little bit differently in how they do things depending on the resources that they have available to them. Having an upweller I think is a massive, massive positive impact for a farm because you're able to do what I just explained.
So I've heard from a bunch of oyster farms, like the life expectancy, I guess. So like they might put a million oysters out or a million baby oysters, and you might get 500,000. So
Yeah.
is that across the board? Like, is that just how it is?
I wouldn't say it's across the board, but I would say that it varies. It's like, and that's one end of the spectrum. You could have a higher success rate, maybe even a little bit lower if you do mess things up or a storm comes and there's some kind of uncontrollable damage that happens. But I mean, I think you can get a good batch of seed from the hatchery that you just have good genetics, because I saw at West Passage, like the year before, we got a really good batch of seed and it was like almost like the whole farm filled up. We didn't even have space for them. Yet the next year we get the same amount of seed and it's just not growing the same. Now, could that be the environment, not enough food for them, / the temperature being too high? It could be those type of variables influencing it. But at the end of the day, I do think the genetics is kind of like a luck thing. Like when you order from the hatchery, you could get the cream of the crop, you could get the middle of the barrel, the bottom of the barrel. It's just kind of a shot in the dark. And I mean, I think another thing too is mussels. Like the mussels that grow on top of the oyster gear, that can seriously have like a negative influence on the amount of flow that the oysters on the inside of those bags is the oysters are getting access to in terms of water as well as food. So mussels are the biggest kind of prevention of growth in all of oysters. A heavy mussel set can destroy an oyster farm if you're not on top of it.
Is that why is that?
Well, think about like you got all your gear and the mussels set on top of it, and they're going to be taking all the food from the water before it reaches the oysters. And not only that, but those biassal threadings, like those hairs that the mussels use to attach, will attach to the oysters sometimes. So instead of like, if you're in floating gear and say, you got waves beating the oysters around, that's good because it makes the shells polished, cleaner, like you want that. But if that mussel is kind of clenching the oyster with the threading to the side of the bag, you're not going to get that same natural tumbling motion from like wind or wave action. So like just being on top of the mussels is super important, I think, and catching them when they're small and killing them is the way to go because once they get to a certain size, killing them isn't as easy. So you can usually get away with drying them out, if you catch them early enough when they're small, and then they will die overnight.
That's interesting. I never even thought about mussels, honestly.
Yeah, no, it's pretty common around here. Like we get like a heavy mussel set. It usually happens like a couple times a year, but every year is different. But to me, that's like the last thing you want is to pull up your gear and have it be covered in mussels.
Right.
And it's just they want to settle there because they know that it's a great place to grow. There's a lot of food, and it's a hard substrate to attach to, whether it's the bag or the float. But yeah.
So so you went to school, you worked at oyster farms. How'd you get into like the raw bar scene?
So one of my buddies, Kenny, who I went to school with, he was working at an oyster bar that was kind of close to the university after college, and I was working at the oyster farm, and I was like, you know what, I could probably pick a couple shifts like doing it, on the weekends or after work, and that's kind of how it started. And that was before COVID, you know. So I was doing my thing, and then basically there was just like some change at the restaurant with management, cutting our pay slash, some disrespect I got from other staff. So I just left, and then basically after COVID, I got contacted by a guy who would buy oysters frequently from Fox Island when I was working there. Jimmy, he owned an oyster bar in Providence, and I ended up working at Pizzico Oyster Bar, like after COVID, still wearing the mask behind the bar shucking, which was always fun because how are you gonna tell if a clam's dead if you're wearing a mask? Right? Like it's like, come on, man. Like I served someone a dead clam one time. I was wearing a mask. So I was like, well, I mean, if I wasn't wearing the mask, maybe it'd be a different story. But yeah, so I worked there and I worked at another restaurant for about a year and a half. And now I'm at Gift Horse in downtown Providence. So yeah, it's been a trip, three different or four different restaurants, and I feel like I've kind of upgraded with every restaurant I've worked at. But yeah, it's pretty sweet now. I like Gift Horse. We get like 8 to 9 different types of oysters. I do the crudo there too as well, lobster and crab that we serve. But yeah, it's a good team over there, doing it right, getting all the oysters super local. Everything's Rhode Island. We buy, directly from the farmers in most cases. So doing it the right way.
You said you saw or you've been upgrading your raw bars. What makes a good raw bar in your opinion?
I mean, freshness of oysters, definitely, as well as like the quality of oysters. Like bucket shuck's great, but let's be honest, this economy's tough, man, for bucket shuck. Like, it's just like, and if people understood the amount of time and effort that goes into farming some of these oysters, bucket shuck isn't really the best thing. We do $2 shucks every day, like 4 to 5, and then on Mondays we do all day $2 oysters. I feel like that's a pretty fair deal, seeing that you are getting like a fresh, high quality farmed oyster, and you have the option of getting 8 to 9 different varieties. Um, but I think, just the freshness and just like your sourcing, that's like the biggest thing. Like having good, farms that are, you're getting from them every week, whether it be, X amount of oysters that you need. But I feel like just getting them fresh and having good, consistent sources are what makes a difference, as well as a good shucker. You can't have a poor shucker with a great oyster because things can turn bad quick. It takes 2 years to grow an oyster and 2 seconds to butcher it. I love to tell people that, but it's the truth.
That's facts, man. I've seen it, and it's really hard to see a lot of times, especially when I feel like chefs don't care. You know what I mean? Like
Mm-hmm.
people can call the shucker a chef. That's cool. Um, but a lot of times if the shucker isn't the last person to look over that plate, it's gonna be the chef. So I feel like whoever looks over that last final plate to make sure there's no shell, no grit, the
Mm-hmm.
oysters are shucked properly. Get that little whiff, make sure you don't have no funkies in there. It's a lot of responsibility because all it takes is one bad oyster for a person to say, I'm never gonna eat oysters again. You know what I mean? And
Yeah, man.
I've heard that story so many times, and I've had to like not retrain people, but like get people like back in the mindset, like even to try again. You know what I mean? And it makes it hard. It makes it hard on us, oyster shuckers who are trying to, um, you know, make a business out of this. Just that one bad time. That's all it takes.
Exactly. And I mean, you've probably done this before. Like, how many times have you shucked an oyster and it's that person's first oyster? Because to me, that's like the biggest, like, you cannot mess that one up. Like, you can, if you serve someone, an oyster that's not good for their first oyster, there's a chance they probably are never going to have oysters again.
Because of you.
Exactly. So it's a big responsibility. Every time someone's like, I've never had one, but I want to try right now. I'm like, okay,
Let's
I
do
got
it.
you. Don't worry.
Bring out the silverware, the china.
Yeah,
No.
and I think too, it's just like people are always like, "Oh, how should I have it the first time?" And my thing is, it's like I would definitely not drench it in cocktail sauce and horseradish for the first time. Like my recommendation, a couple drops of lemon juice or a little bit of mignonette. I think that's like the right way to have it if you're having it for the first time, just so you kind of are able to, experience the flavor and texture fully.
Yeah, same here. It's all about making it sexy, making it beautiful, making it seductive. Um, it's just amazing to watch people's life get changed. You know what I mean? Like instantly, a good oyster can make and break somebody. You know what I mean? So like, if it's that person's first oyster, and then they, the first couple chews, and then that third or fourth, and then it starts all, percolating on the taste buds, and you just watch like their life, like, yeah, that's an oyster lover for life there.
That's what I mean too. It's like, but every oyster matters. That's the way I look at it. Like everyone matters. If you serve one bad one, even if it's out of 100, you could be preventing yourself from more sales. I mean, I had one of my regulars. I do a pop up at a brewery in Providence, and him and his buddy. I mean, dude, they broke my record for two people. They ordered 5 dozen oysters and a half dozen clams. Two people do it. Like,
That's amazing.
I was like, they were like, all right, another 2 dozen. All right, like, another dozen. Like, Jesus, guys, like, but they were loving them, and it was the fall. This is like the best time of year to eat the oysters too. They're putting on their winter fat, that cold water. Like this is when people should be binging, on oysters.
So in your opinion, what's the biggest difference between summer oysters and fall oysters?
I just think that the meats can be spent, on some oysters in the summer. Obviously, some farms are using triploids, but most oyster farms are using diploids. And I mean, I think diploids come out better generally anyway than triploids based on my experience shucking them. But you do get the oysters that spawn, so they're going to be spawned out, watery, not as full bodied. But oysters are still good year round. I just think in the fall with that cold water, those oysters know winter's coming, so they just fatten up instead of growing shell. They're just that meat is getting to the point where when you open it, it's going to be bursting out of the shell. And for me, I feel like they have a sweeter flavor as well, just from like the glycogen storage. You can taste it in the adductor muscle on them as well as like the meat.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that adductor gets like a sweet scalp, just
yeah.
real
I
delicate.
We have a small like bay scallop fishery locally, like, and it's only November through December, and like, I mean, getting those boys like this time of year, it's like you put sugar on the thing before you eat them. It's so good. But yeah, I just think it's the drop in water temp combined with the food that's available for them. Because a lot of the times, like if you stab the stomach on some of our like local oysters this time of year, like you're gonna see like red, kind of the algae that they're feeding on, like a red or like a purple almost coming out of the stomach. And I think that's just giving it that nice fall flavor that they take on this time of year.
So
Uh,
you did talk a little bit about diploids and triploids. Could you break that down for the listening audience if they don't know already?
yeah, so diploids are just your typical oyster that it can spawn. It has the ability to spawn. Triploids are basically genetically modified organisms, whether that's through that selective breeding or other methods. Um, and they can't spawn. So really the only difference is triploids are going to grow faster than diploids just because they devote all of their kind of effort to growing, not spawning. So when a diploid, they spawn in the summer, it's based off temperature. Um, Once it reaches a certain temperature, they kind of know, okay, it's time to spawn, and they make a bunch of gametes and they'll release those into the water. And they, instead of growing the meat or the shell, they're making those gametes so they can spawn. So that's really the difference. And I think that diploids, because they grow slower, the shells end up being thicker and more kind of like shucker friendly. You're not going to be getting as much hockey pucks or snap shells. That shell is going to be a little bit thicker. And I've even found that they have better shape, like kind of a more rounder shape, as opposed to like the diploids with a more narrow kind of shape. But I'm sure that's just my experience. I'm sure everyone has kind of different experiences with different batches of diploids and triploids. But
Yeah,
yeah,
that sounds about right. From my knowledge also. So what do you think the biggest what's the best thing you've learned as far as working in raw bars and dealing with people and um different personalities? You never know who's coming to, your raw bar. What do you think, what's your biggest lesson?
I just think it's like, don't make any, expectations for each customer because they're all different in terms of what they like and how they prefer to, consume their shellfish, which is completely okay. I think it's just not forcing anyone to kind of do something a certain way. I mean, if you want to douse your oysters in cocktail sauce, go right ahead. I don't care. Do your thing. Like as long as you're eating oysters, that's all I care about. I do think that like I really appreciate it when the people are kind of at the bar will, commend me for my good shucking. Just be, shoot me a compliment because there's a lot of bad shuckers out there, and I'm not saying that it's their fault because a lot of guys they're just trying to make a paycheck, man, and you got to respect that. But for me, like I'm striving to get better and better with every oyster, and kind of happened. I did my first competition a couple of years ago, and I was like, that's when I kind of my eyes opened. Like I can get a lot better at this. You think you're good until you see, the boys go at it, and it's good to get humbled. I think because it, sets a kind of new bar for you to try and reach. And I mean, I'm relatively new to the shucking thing, like whatever. I've been shucking for like 6 years on and off because COVID, no one was shucking. But I've been shucking pretty hard for the past like 3.5 years. Um, so I think I got the right. I've always been changing the way I kind of shuck too with the method, just slight tweaks on it, not wearing a glove anymore, using the knife that I like. It took me a while to kind of get used to that little knife, which I know you were asking. I'll show you guys. I got my knives here, so I'll bust this guy out for everyone to see. But yeah, this is the little Chesapeake competition by R. Murphy. Now this one had snapped, so I filed the tip back down and cut the handle back a little bit so I'd have a little bit more blade. But I've gone through about 10 of these things and they are discontinued, so you can't get them anymore. But I do have someone right now working on a custom knife for me that has this exact handle and blade. So she's going to be able to hopefully produce a couple knives for me that I'm not going to have to worry about snapping.
Nice, nice. Yeah, that
So
always helps when you have a knife maker in your pocket. You know what I mean?
yeah, I mean, she's local. Just she's only made a couple oyster knives, but she's done a lot of like chef knives. But it's a simple enough design. I think she'll knock it out of the park. So looking forward to using it. I mean, she's going to use higher quality steel that isn't going to snap. That'll be the biggest difference.
Well, let me know when they get done. I would love to try one out for sure.
Yeah, no, definitely. I'll post about it and definitely make like a little video kind of explaining it. But I mean, the reason I like this knife is because I can open oysters from the side, front, or the back with it. And I feel like it has a nice amount of flexibility. So that helps with riding that top shell and not stabbing any part of the mantle or the stomach once you get inside the oyster. Um, I was using a New Haven before that I found out about this knife, which worked, but I feel like I'm able to shuck faster and cleaner with this one. Um, for just that reason. But yeah,
What do you
what
think is going to take for you to get to the next level of shucking?
I think just shucking more. I mean, it's one of those things, man. The more you shuck, the better you get. And doing different types of oysters, different kind of sizes, different, origins. I mean, the restaurant I work at now, we do all Rhode Island oysters, but because we have four different salt ponds as well as, the Narragansett Bay and the Sakonnet River, we have a lot of different growing environments. So the oysters, they might be from the same state, but they open differently, each one based on, the seed that farm bought, as well as their growing methods and, how much time and effort they're putting into the farming aspect of things. I feel like if you're an oyster farmer, shucking your oysters is the best way to kind of get a sense of how your product is. Like sit down, shuck 100 and see how much actually, you're able to shuck cleanly out of that 100. And then you can get a sense of your kind of efficiency that the restaurants are going to be experiencing when you send off your bags to them. I feel like there's some oyster farmers that can't shuck oysters, which is crazy. But
Yeah, I've definitely came across a few that couldn't shuck their oysters, but a quick little lesson. And yeah, so like even with home shuckers, just taking the edge off. You know what I mean? Like oyster shucking is not rocket science. It does take practice to get good, but you can still open oysters at home. Like it's no big deal. Just I feel like it's just like anything else, like in life. If you want to learn, you'll learn. You know, and just
yeah.
taking it slow. Um, and knowing that every oyster knife does something different. You know,
Mm-hmm.
and every oyster, every I guess like every type of oyster, um, has a specific knife that works best for it. You know.
Yeah, I mean, kind of reading the shell and kind of based on what your eyes are telling you, I feel like you can be like, okay, like this is the right tool for the job. You got three different size hammers. Which one is appropriate for the nail you're trying to hit. Um, I feel like, you got also the thing is with the at home shuckers is like they just don't kind of have access to the highest quality oysters, I'd say in most cases. Like a lot of the people that, I hear at the bar, like, yeah, I get the dollar oysters from Whole Foods every Friday, and it's like, well, man, I mean, they're probably not the freshest, first off, and they probably aren't the most high quality oysters either. I mean, some oysters, man, it's like opening up a can of soda. Where it's like others, it's like trying to open a bottle of wine, you know? It's you can have a positive or negative experience shucking depending on the oysters. I mean, like wild oysters, very variable. You could get a good batch, you could get a bad batch. They're all going to be a little different shapes, a little different to open as well. Whereas farmed oysters, most cases, the farms have a consistent size and a consistent shape, as well as a consistent opening style to successfully, pop them open. But I
Yep.
mean, you probably see that with you get a bag of oysters, you're washing them, you're looking at them, you're like, oh yeah, these are gonna be easy. Or you could
Yeah.
get a bag and you could be like, oh shit, there's some flip flops in here.
Yep.
Yeah,
I've definitely got some of those. The thing for me is like, you know, even though I want to be, cost effective in this business, a lot of times I go for shucking these. I'm
Yeah,
like, the
no,
markup isn't everything. Like, sometimes I just want an easy shucking knife. I mean, an easy shucking night. Like,
yeah,
if I get sometimes I know like local wild oysters, they're gonna be come on, dude. They're gonna be a little harder to shuck. Where like if I get something from Prince Edward Island, I know it's gonna be money. I just know that like those smooth shells are gonna be like easy to open.
yeah. Nah, there's definitely nothing worse than like an oyster covered in barnacles. I mean, that's definitely bad. I mean, that's just your hands will get cut up pretty quick. As well as like if they're even covered in like the slipper snails. I mean, those snails die and then they stink. They die before the oyster does. And then like, you go and serve that oyster to someone, they might put their mouth on that part of the shell where that snail juice was and it's dead. Like, so that,
Yeah,
you get what you pay for. And
yeah,
my experience too, it's like I buy from the farms that I've worked for, as well as one of my buddies that has his own farm. And my buddy that has the farm in the pond, it's in the salt pond, so it's a different environment than the other farms in the bay. Salt pond gets warmer in the summer, also gets colder in the fall, cools down quicker. I don't really buy oysters from the salt pond in the summers because that water's too warm. I feel like they don't taste as good as the oyster coming out of the bay, where a 20-minute drive difference, and the oysters, they're still in cold water in the summer, and they taste better as a result. Now this time of year, any oysters you can get it from the pond or the bay, doesn't matter. We're cold now, but yeah, man, I feel like the same thing. It's like if you spend, say, like 5-10 cents more per oyster, and you get a higher success rate, that pays for itself. It ends up like evening out, if not, tilting in your favor. For every oyster that you got to throw out of the bag, basically every other oyster in that bag just went up by a penny in price. That's kind
yeah,
of the formula,
yep.
I've came up with.
I know. Over the summer shoot, I got two boxes. The boxes, both boxes, were garbage, and that
Yeah.
was just I had it. I had I went back to the distributor, and they made it right. But I'm like, if I was at a private event, I would have been
Mm.
out of luck. That would have been bad business.
Yeah, I mean, fortunate for me, I have the ability to pick up directly from these farmers. So a lot of the times it's like I'm meeting them right at the dock, as I come off the farm, and just that not having to go through a middleman, helps me out because I'm able to get the product fresher. And the less hands that touch it, the better. I mean, a lot of oysters get damaged in shipping and handling. Like, I mean, yeah, they're oysters. They're not rocks, though. If you chip the shell, all that liquor, is going to come out, and it's going to be a dry oyster. So I think, like, not beating them up, kind of keeping them in one cooler, washing them down makes a difference. And another thing too, I like to do is get a couple different size oysters. So it's like, you have a couple options. You got your people that like their small or medium. You got your large people. Cater to both groups. And I mean, variety is the spice of life. People, you're gonna sell more oysters to people if you got more than one variety.
Yeah, for sure. So, how would you advise somebody at a raw bar in ordering oysters?
I would say, get a mix of a couple different types, just so you can kind of pick which one you like more and experience the different flavors that the oysters have. um for example, like Fox Island and West Passage, the two farms I was getting a lot of oysters from this year, they're grown within sight of each other, but one's on the surface and the other's on the bottom, about 25 feet of water. So the temperature of the water that they're growing in is drastically different, on the bottom in 20 feet compared to the surface in about, the first 2-3 feet of that water column. So I think just having that, all right, these are a little sweeter, these are a little more briny, these have more minerality to them. These are going to be a little more buttery, kind of earthy back end finish. I think that people enjoy kind of tasting the difference, because it's like drinking different types of wine. You don't always want to have the same type of wine, and wine's always different. I mean, wine and oysters are very similar, influenced by the weather, and every year's different. I think just trying different types and figuring out what you like.
All right, man. So we're gonna cut it, man. So what do you think? Well, I guess what can somebody look forward to if they come see you at a raw bar, and where can they find you?
Yeah, so I mean, you can find me. I got my Instagram's at Shuckologist. I also have shuckologist.com where you can send me an email, if you want to book me for like wedding, birthday party, corporate events. I did a bunch of different stuff these past 2 years, going into the third year of this business. So definitely trying to, keep the wheels turning. If you want to come see me at Gift Horse, downtown Providence, 272 Westminster Street. I'm there Monday, Thursday, Fridays, and we serve food 4 to 11 p.m. But yeah, you can find me. I do local farmers markets in Rhode Island, the Hope Street Farmers Market, Providence Flea, pop-ups at Long Live Beer Works, as well as I got a couple other more bars contacting me that I'm going to be doing pop-ups at. But my Instagram page is really where you'll see all that, where I'll post where I'm at, stuff like that. So just at Shuckologist, probably the best option.
One thing I kind of forgot to get into, what do you think people should keep in mind when planning an oyster party at home?
Um, I think one thing people should keep in mind is just, where you want to have your shucker set up is kind of important. Um, I've had to set up on the beach before. I've had to set up, all the way down someone's lawn, down a set of 12 stone staircase, just understand, like, when you hire a shucker, he's showing up with coolers of ice, oysters, like a lot of heavy equipment. I have a hand truck, obviously, but depending on the size of the party, just kind of understand that it's not a little bit of stuff that we need to kind of get going. Like, we got to have a bunch of stuff unloaded and set up if we want to, pump out a few hundred oysters. But there is no party too big or too small. I've done small events. I've done up to 200-person events. So just kind of any size I'm willing to cater to, and we can make it work as long as you'll do at least 100 oysters. That's my minimum.
One of the biggest questions I always get is, how many oysters do we need? How do
That's
you,
true.
how do you gauge that question?
Well, so I'm like, all right, what is like the shellfish crowd? Because I've done, there's certain families too that I feel like they could eat the whole friggin', clam shop. Like, I just am like, how are you guys eating this many? Whereas other people, it's like, you have other food that you catered. Oysters are really just kind of a snack slash appetizer in addition. But like for like 50 people, if that's like kind of the number, I suggest like 200 oysters and maybe 50 clams or something. Like, it's always like a ratio of like 4 oysters to 1 clam, or like 3 oysters to 1 clam. But you never know, man. You got those people that will take down like 3 dozen oysters, and then it throws the whole count off. So I always try and estimate a little bit more just so we don't run out. But I feel like after doing so many events, you kind of get like a mental calculator of like, okay, like you can kind of gauge it a little bit better. But like, I mean, I did a 200-person wedding this summer. I mean, we went to 500 like it was nothing. And I suggested like 600, I think. So it was like, it worked out perfect. It was basically hit what we needed to. Which that was inconvenient, that particular wedding, because the event planner didn't tell me I had to set up in an extremely inconvenient spot. So all loading my stuff up was a nightmare. And basically, the time I got set up, the ceremony was ending, and I just got hit by an angry mob of people wanting oysters. So I was shucking as fast as I could. And I mean, I did the competition in Wellfleet this year. I don't know if you saw, I got, eighth place at 25 guys, 2 minute 45 second for 2 dozen, which, I'm okay with. Obviously took 2 minutes to win, but I know I could be better, and I'm just going to keep on keeping on, man. That's all you can do.
Keep on keeping on. You're
You
right.
did well too. Congrats at your finish at nationals, man. Nice job. Seriously.
Appreciate you. I never honestly, nationals for me, man, was like I was in a weird place because I just got back from Canada and did pretty good in Canada. I did fifth. And then, but it's a different oyster, It's
Mm-hmm.
Maryland wild oysters. It's nothing like it, just like it's nothing like farm raised oysters or Canadian oysters.
Definitely.
But not that I was cocky or anything. It's just that it's been so long since I competed in nationals, so that was the other, mind thing of it, it's just like, yeah, you're there to have a good time and see your friends and family, and, it's like a family reunion, but you want to do well also, especially
Yeah.
when you're oyster ninja, you got to do a little
Oh
bit.
yeah. Yeah, man, you build that pressure, dude. The pressure's real,
Right,
It's
right.
one of those things. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, when I got back from that competition, the first thing, everyone in the restaurant, how'd you do? How, like, peppering you with like, how'd you do there? How'd you do? Like, and it's like, well, I got eighth. It wasn't bad,
Right, right.
but I mean, they know they respect me at the restaurant. They know I'm the oyster guy there. So
Yeah, yeah, that's what it's all about. But again, man, I appreciate you for taking time out your day and talking with the Oyster Ninja podcast. I hope some listeners come check you out. And I wish you all the success, man. Hopefully see you soon.
yeah, man, love to cross paths soon. I'll let you know if I'm ever down in the area, but hey man, just keep on shucking. Wish you the best too this year. Hopefully tough economy right now, but the
Tough,
shuckers will
tough.
persist, bro. We got this. Just gotta
We got this. It's just really, I feel like it's just more so of knowing our worth, not being afraid to charge what we want to charge or what we think we deserve, and for the people to respect the price and respect the craft, and that's really what comes down to, just respecting the craft, and it is what it is. There's no more dollar. There's no more bucket shucks. The bucket shuck days are gone. And if you do it, if you find it, that's a blessing. You're gonna find them more down south, but I'm sorry, like
yeah.
northeast, like no, it's not an option.
Let's be
You
real
know.
too. If you're gonna get sick, it's gonna be during bucket shuck. When the shucker's getting fucking bombed with tickets, doesn't have time to actually give every oyster the proper attention it deserves.
Right, right, right. Yeah,
You
for
know.
sure. All right, man. Enjoy the rest of your day, okay?
All right, Gardner, nice talking to you, man.
For sure, for
Appreciate it.
sure. Peace.
Peace, buddy.